We will now move over to our second session, themed Setting the Norms the Indian Way. The session will be chaired by Professor S.D. Muni, former Member Executive Council, MP IDSA, Professor Emeritus, Jawaharlal Nehru University. The distinguished panel includes Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, former Ambassador of India to Libya and Jordan, Ambassador Manjeev Singh Puri, former Ambassador to Nepal and Brussels, and Ambassador Ajay Bisaria, former Ambassador to Canada and High Commissioner to Pakistan. I would request Professor Muni to conduct the proceedings, sir.
Thank you very much. To begin with, let me also thank ICWA and Dr. Vijay Thakur Singh, Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh, for inviting me to this very important conference where I will learn the unfolding of parameters of India's foreign policy. The theme of our session is norms and how to build them, sustain them through institutional participation. And we have a very eminent panel of Ambassador Trigunayat, Ambassador Puri, and Ambassador Bisaria, who have worked in international organizations and institutions, and will take us there as to how we can sustain these norms which we wish to build. India has always been active in building norms. In the past also, I think Ambassador Singh very neatly defined some of the values, and in the previous session also we have discussed a lot of these values which have pushed India's foreign policy. Now, the difference was that in the past, we were not at the high table of decision making. Now we seem to be poised on becoming on the high tables of decision making, and all of us are very acutely conscious of G20 chairmanship, SCO chairmanship, participation in various other organizations. But I think building norms will go beyond these what I call rotatory chairmanships. And they should also go beyond 2024, where there is a lot of emphasis to link it up with domestic politics. But the challenge before us is how to blend these old norms with the contemporary interests which we are looking forward to, as has been emphasized in the previous sense. When we look at this, there are questions which arise. What norms we are going to build? And this is where the synthesis of the old norms with the new requirements would really, how to synthesize them. Then how to articulate them. And we have taken the platform of voice of the South, Global South. Now, Global South is now operating in a different international context. The Global South is also different now from what it was earlier. The Global South is rising. It is inching towards the prosperous North, whatever you call. There are many countries which are very dynamically developing, and they have aspirations. Now, this Global South is operating in a global context, which, fortunately or unfortunately, is reverting back to the Cold War polarization, somehow, very close to that. Now, if this polarization, we have promised, and our foreign minister, our prime minister has repeatedly mentioned that we want to be bridge between this polarizing world. We cannot take sides on this side or that side, and that has come out very, very clearly. You call it non-alignment 2.0, you call it by any other name, but the very clear message is that India's independent foreign policy would not completely be clubbed by either of these polarization. Now, we have to be careful about that. There are also some lessons which we must draw from our past exercise of setting up norms. The first lesson is that we cannot really set the norms or sustain them unless we have capabilities built up, both military as well as economic capabilities. Diplomatic capabilities we have always displayed and displayed very, very efficiently. Second question, second lesson which we need to draw from our past experiences, how can we harmonize and synergize the voice of the South with particularly our neighbors? And there is a reference to the neighborhood first policy, which again has a lot of challenges, particularly in the context of Pakistan and China. And somehow I am quite sure in my mind that unless you carry the neighbors around with you, along with you, the global setting up of norms would be far more ineffective so far as India is concerned. Because the world looks at us also not simply by our words but by our practice. Therefore, this is a major question, a major challenge, major experience we have to draw from the past experiences. That in the past also all our efforts were to a very large extent dented by the neighbors, and neighbors are still not very cooperating, particularly two of them. Thirdly, this is a context of the world in which we cannot contest or we cannot confront the powers that be. And that's where I said we have to be working like a bridge in order to evolve a consensus on the values and sustain those values. I'm sure some of these questions and some of these lessons the panelists will take us to in terms of shaping the values. And with this, I come to our very eminent panelist and request Ambassador Trigunayat to make his presentation. All of us have 10 minutes each, so kindly stick to the time so that next section is not disturbed.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And thank you, Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh, for inviting me to be part of this esteemed panel. It was really amazing to listen to the previous panel and delving down into the history and the cultural and civilizational roots of our foreign policy that has evolved and has done extremely well for India. But today, what we are seeing is the world is suffering from this global governance crisis. And the Russian-Ukraine war, which continues unabated, has created major disruptions. And the world seems to be at an inflection point. So what we are seeing today is the 3D crisis, which I refer to, as marked by deceleration, disruption, and decoupling. Now, we are also looking at these cascading interconnected threats that undermine the global stability, including a relentless pandemic, runaway climate change, inequalities, economic insecurity, massive digital vulnerability, and somebody calling me. But also at the same time, when we look at what has in fact happened during this time, is that while we were thinking of some kind of a non-proliferation going along, what we are witnessing is that the major powers are moving towards the nuclear proliferation and threats of the nuclear weapons. And that is likely to be some kind of a nuclear Armageddon that is being talked about. There's something new that has happened in the recent past. In this particular war, was the weaponization of the financial instruments, energy, food, fertilizer, and even life-saving drugs and vaccines. So confronted by this widening area of transactional national risks, most governments are distracted, trying to just somehow salvage the situation. How it is going to eventually work out is anybody's guess. What I look at it, that probably we are, as Professor Muni also mentioned, we are heading towards a Cold War 2.0. And Cold War 2.0, with the kind of weaponization of the basic fundamental instruments, has hurt all the basic norms that existed until now. Sanctions have always been there, but the way they have been implemented today are going to create much bigger problems. And Ambassador Vishnu Prakash spoke about how they hurt us with regard to Iran and with some of the places where we had to change our policy in order to align our larger interests. The United Nations, we have seen, or the Security Council per se, has not lived up to the expectations. In 75 years, has not been able to reform, has done where none of the interests, geopolitical or major interests of the UNSC, five permanent members were involved. That's where they worked, and thereafter they did not. And then we are seeing, of course, the Secretary General Guterres keeps on talking about where world summits and Social Security Council and several other things we are looking at it. So where the world is moving is countries like India, which are aspirational, assertive, and acceptable, are looking for newer modes of international interactions. And they are like creating some kind of a mini-laterals after having taken the world along through the non-aligned movement, which we have heard about, and being the voice of the global south, which we heard Prime Minister Modi with his 4R metrics. And they are actually the root of the current problems where the global south or the developing world has been sidelined totally. And India becomes the voice of that. And that would, in my view, would be sort of some kind of a norm setting. Unless UN is reformed, or the other multilateral organizations in which India has been the founding member are reformed, we are looking at a possibility of Cold War 2.0 with US and the West on the one side, China and Russia on the other with some other countries, and India having possibility of once again emerging as a leader of the nations for strategic autonomy. We have seen that most of the countries in the developing world, in Asia, Latin America, Africa, are averse to joining either of the two blocs. So once that happens, then obviously we are looking at that kind of situation where we need to be prepared to take the leadership position, not only in development of the multilateral institutions or a multipolar world, but at the same time, we should also try to work on our own leadership and be ready to provide for that. And being an international, the third, fourth largest economy that we are going to emerge, we are already going to become the largest population in the world by March this month. And the world is looking up to us. So it is a time. So we need to look at something which are like practical, adaptable, economic, and voluntary kind of association of various countries in which we can work together. So we have had this policy which was impacted by our own colonial experiences, geographical compulsions, strategic location, historical narratives, and ancient philosophical thoughts of universalism. So one of the norms or the way the countries could work possibly, and which Prime Minister Modi also spoke in his the depoliticization of the essentials, whether it is energy, the food, the medicines. And so therefore, when we talk of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, it embraces a lot of things. It may be from the past, but it needs to be put into a newer perspective. And I think that's what India is trying to do under its G20 presidency. While the consensus-based issues have to be there, but we need to find how we are going to work. How our policies have actually managed, I think that they are basically, again, by the 3Ds, as I call as dialogue, the diplomacy, and the dividend of whether it is a digital dividend, whether it is our human resource dividend, or whether it is continuing to develop our country and the rest of the world through our share and care approach and through other things. So I feel that in this kind of a situation, be it the minilateral approach, like the I2U2 or the Quad, we have talked about the BRICS and the RIC and the JI, so several umpteen number of organizations, India is a member and part of it, and has been leading them actually. In that case, what provides India is the heft that I feel that that these are the alternatives that gives you the balancing and the positioning in a strategic autonomy model that we are. Now, how the Indian foreign policy has fared, I would like to go, many people will say that quoting it perhaps is just salivating about it, but it's not true. Fact remains is that if your arch rival in Pakistan and their leaders continue to compliment you on your policy of independent, whether it's China, also Russia, everybody else says it. But I came across this very interesting viral paper in the Pakistan Tribune by Shahzad Chaudhry. In several points he has written about it. Perhaps somebody might say it was paid off, but I would say that what he says was very interesting. He says, India does what it feels like, and to the extent she needs, and it all stays kosher. Two opposing military superpowers of the world claim India to be its ally. If this is not diplomatic coup, then what is? India is relevant to the world. India's global footprint is remarkable. Modi has brought India to the point where she has begun to cast a wider net of influence and impact. Pakistan has been skillfully reduced to a footnote to this Indian script. Now, I think that this particular statement, or the pulled it out from his paper, in fact, says quite a bit about how India is moving uh, through its multi-alignment policy and through its exercise of the strategic autonomy. So I would say that we will have to continue to work as the voice of the Global South for the cause of the Global South, to work as a founding member of various organizations for the reforms and relevance. This will be required. And while we work on this global agenda, which has been now made out to be as respond, recognize, respect, and reform, so India will continue to be a major player in this if we continue to be on the path of being a strong country, an economically strong country, very, very important. Militarily strong, very important. That kind. And having a principled policy approach, which India had, the dialogue diplomacy.
Sorry for the glitch. Can you please continue?
Ambassador Trigunayat, carry on.
Yeah, thank you so much. I've finished now.
Okay. Thank you
I hope
very
I was
much.
audible.
Thank you very much for highlighting the value and challenge of building consensus and also going into the strategic autonomy aspect. May I now request Ambassador Puri to share his thoughts with us?
Thank you very much, Professor Muni. I'm very grateful to you. Let me begin by thanking ICWA, Director General Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh, Dhrubya Jyoti, thank you very much for putting it all together. Professor Muni, before I come to you, I want to say I heard a part of the previous panel, and I really want to appreciate Ambassador Nalin Suri. Of course, he's our senior mentor for many of us, but for bringing out aspects of the Indian Constitution and discussions in the Constituent Assembly, because we all tend to forget where India lies and where things come from in the constitutional sense of things for us as a nation state. I'm not talking about civilizational state, it's a different matter altogether. Secondly, everybody talks about economy. I can't be any different. I have to say, economy matters. You have the money. Believe me, even McDonald's becomes the greatest soft power that anybody can think. This is reality, and that's something that we must accept. Now, Professor Muni, I want to thank you very much. You said something very interesting, which my colleagues here across this entire spectrum should understand. Get your act together with neighbors. You remember there are these old stories, perhaps the most interesting one, that when Brazil became independent, and I'm talking about 150 years back, their first foreign minister, who remained in the job for about 20, 25 years, only went around the neighborhood. It's important. If you are not let me say, in consonance with those who are around you, you're really not going to be able to hit the hard ball anywhere in the world. This is important, and you very rightly said so. You also made a number of other very, very relevant issues about contemporary realities, the South, etc. I just want to make one simple point. And again, this point goes back to something that you said. You are not at the high table. You are likely to be in the high table. You are not at the high table. And hence, today, what you say matters. I think let's understand a few simple things. All of us, at least my generation and those before us, almost never complained when we were asked to stand second in the line, because there was one that was ahead of us. Whether in March of this year or next year, Anil, it doesn't really matter. If you become the largest country in the world, it's one thing what we think about population as a size domestically. That's a matter of debate. Many of us can have different views on it. But can you imagine if you are the largest country in the world, what it means in terms of foreign policy? Let me leave a simple question to all of you. Do you think every child in every country in the world who goes to only the third or fourth standard in school today knows about India? Of course, we would like to say yes, but there is a chance it may not be the case. Do you think once we become the largest country in the world, any kid who goes to school anywhere in the world, goes only to the fourth standard geography lesson, will not have heard about India? Please understand what it does for the world's understanding of who you are. In 1945, if the Chinese were grandfathered to become a member of the Security Council, no matter the geopolitics which was involved, the argument that was the largest of the have-nots. And that has consistently been the case. Today, in some senses, you're going to be that. So that's one thing. Secondly, we will be among the three largest economies in the world. And I'm not looking at the European Union as one economy, but even if we are assuming we'll be among the 3 or 4 largest economies in the world by the year 2035. What does this do for things? It makes you relevant to the world. It makes the world say, look, guys, if we want to have a rule, you need to have this country along with you, if not making the rule, at least part of those who are molding the rule into coming in. You can't just be rule takers. You know, when we were given the concept note, there were various things there about terrorism, etc., etc. You understand a very simple thing. Why do you think the CCIT has not been adopted? For a very simple reason. It's of no relevance to those who matter. They get what they want through the methodologies of the Security Council. We're struggling to get everything done. That's the nature of global power. Hegemony has not changed. Nobody is changing. What you say for principles is very valid. They are your points. What do the Western countries say? They say they are very principled. Everything that they do is extremely principled. They stand for freedoms. They stand for capitalism. They stand for people doing what they want to do. And yet, are they any number 2 in terms of hegemony? We look at hegemony only as one country exercising hegemony. People have exercised hegemony over us, 197 years of colonization. Point about hegemony is be a force for good. Take the largest number together. And I want to leave one very important thought. You know, the mention of Pakistan is made. I mean, let's understand, it's a country which is what 1/6 of India's size. And of course, it's not going away. Many of our Pakistan experts try to, highlight this, but many others simply brush it aside. It isn't going away. It will be among the 10 odd largest countries in the world, perhaps among the 15, 20 largest economies in the world. However, the big issue that we have is on our northern border. And that is going to be the greatest set of competition we need to manage it. And how do we manage it? The way forward really is A, economic growth, B, a balancing position in the world. And that's particularly important for a country like India, one of the 4 or 5 largest economies, the largest society in the world. Now, let me leave another thought with you. And this thought, very often, at least in today's day and age, gets forgotten, brushed aside or thought. If we are the largest democracy in the world, if we are the largest country in the world, and we will have a GDP of the same size as the United States of America, why can't we be the leaders of the free world? I'm saying this deliberately, provocatively. Do you understand what it does? It also pits us for that leadership, which those take for granted and which has been the bulwark of industrialization the last 300 years. These are the changes and these are the challenges that we confront. But are we going to be there? The answer, in my opinion, is it's inevitable. Can we accelerate and move things faster? I hope we do. Economic growth is the absolute key to it, because at the end of the day, the world listens. Even if you have a good idea, only if you are the powerful. Then your ideas matter. Now, coming to institutional arrangement. Again, it was pointed out in the previous panel, India's contribution to the two world wars. How come we were a founding member of the League of Nations? We were a founding member of the United Nations. We were there in all three UN conferences. Yes, we got left out. I gave you the simplest explanation which is put out in the world. Forget geopolitics. Forget the fact that we were a colony. The Chinese were also in no greater position at that stage. That's how this world crumbles, and that's how things get done. Now, the important thing for us to realize is that contemporary reality demands that India be recognized. I dare say Indo-Pacific and Asia be recognized. These are the shifting strands of geopolitical power in the world. And India's role in this as a democracy, as a freedom-loving country, as a country which exercises positions for freedom, as a country which is a huge and growing economic power, our ideas, our position, our being part of the rule makers becomes an important and integral element of what is happening. This is the nature of what we will see. Now, Professor Muni, I don't know if I have a minute or two, but I just want to say, if there are young people who are participating in this, I just want to tell them I am very happy to them if they are from India. When I joined the Indian Foreign Service, the greatest things that people like me used to want to do was to attend the Aid India Consortium meetings. Why? Because that's where some power was going on and some things for the benefit of India would take place. When I retired at the end of 2019, one of my last acts was to cut perhaps the largest check given by India to any other country as part of a cooperation and development partnership program. A changing India has come about. But I think I was still in the middling lot. What the future generation are going to see is India, a country, even if we take 3, 4, 5, 10 years more, India, a country in their lifetime, which will have to be a country that will have to be listened to. You may not agree. That may take another 20, 30 years. But a country which will be there, a country that will matter. It will matter because of the size, the economy, the population. It will also matter because it will contribute hugely to global brain power, if I may say so. We often talk in terms of the diaspora, in terms of other things, but our abilities to be able to contribute. We haven't done very well in terms of technological innovations in India, but I'm sure all of these things will catch up. I therefore see for all the young generations in India a wonderful future, a beautiful future, a future where India will play its rightful role in the global economy. Let me conclude. At the stroke of the midnight hour on the 15th of August 1947, we said, Jawaharlal Nehru said, that long time ago we made a tryst with destiny and the time has come for us to redeem it. As Prime Minister Modi chairs the G20, the premier economic body in the world, as we chair the SEO, as the world sees what is happening, this is certainly an Amrit Kal, a good time for us. And I hope in the next 25 years, we will certainly take our country forward towards Viksit Bharat, and more than that, a true force for good and a good world at that. Thank you, Professor Muni.
Thank you very much. I share your hopes that we will be heard, we will be listened to, but still I find in some of the critical high tables like the UN Security Council and NSG, there is a lot of challenge and resistance, and I hope we'll be able to overcome that. May I now request Ambassador Bisaria kindly to share your thoughts with us, please?
Thank you, Professor Muni. Thank you, Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh and your whole team for putting this together. And I'm grateful to my two colleagues, Ambassador Puri, Ambassador Trigunayat, for making such excellent points that makes my job much simpler. So what I thought I would do is, without repeating too much of what they said, make two very short broader geopolitical points and then talk of three diplomatic innovations that demonstrate how India has won its position on the diplomatic high table, whether it's on it or about to be on it, and what it should do to stay on this diplomatic high table and to earn the respect of its peers, to be able to be in that position. If I look at the historical sweep, we talk about the period of the bipolar world from 1945 to 1991 to being a unipolar world, which I think was from 1991 to about 2008 when Russia started a certain revival. But that was the period when the United States remained unchallenged. And then this multipolar world that we are talking about, where we are talking about India as a country which is inventing multi-alignment and the ability to navigate this multipolar world. But the fact is that today's world is much more complex. Anil referred to a revival of the Cold War. I would say that we have actually two Cold Wars going on. Cold War 1.0 has been revived. We were too quick to write the obituary of the Cold War in the 90s. It turns out that the end of the history was not reached in 1991, and the victory of the liberal Western order was not final. It was only a frozen conflict, and and it has revived in multiple ways as we see the Russia-Ukraine war today. And the second Cold War is the one that is on between the United States on the one hand and the larger West and China, which is again a geopolitical contestation where a rising China with an unruly rise is challenging both militarily and economically the United States. So I think we are living in a world of these two dyads, and this is the disruptive world which India is dealing with, and dealing with, as we all seem to agree, with a certain degree of competence. Um, India's aspiration, we know, is to be a leading power. That seems to be something within grasp, rather than a balancing power, which India has been recognized as. And as we've been discussing this morning, we need to be, or India has the aspiration to be, a norm setter rather than a norm taker. And all of India's nimble diplomacy in the post Cold War world has been towards moving towards an objective of being a force that can determine these norms. So, India's economic growth of the 90s, of course, added to the credibility, added to the heft. And I would argue that India has been on this high table from about 2000, the Vajpayee era, because India became part of many relevant conversations in the 21st century, including those of climate, trade, health, and of global governance itself. And I think I would agree that the sweet spot has perhaps come at this moment when India took over the G20 presidency and, of course, the SCO, and did it with a certain degree of credibility, with a voice that matters. Also, I think it is clear to the world that as these two Asian giants rise in the 21st century, India's rise will be different from China's. It will be peaceful and using all the principles that we talked about this morning of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, one earth and one family, unlike China's rise, which is likely to be more unruly and more belligerent. What we have now seen also, I think, and that's the second point I wanted to make, is that we do live in a world where some writers are calling it between two orders. But certainly the old order has been questioned and questioned quite aggressively. So we are more in a G20 world since I think at least 2008 than a United Nations world, because the major problems of the world, including the financial crisis of 2008 and multiple other problems, is something that we look at these 20 major economies to address. So plurilateral agreements are here to stay, and we are in a multipolar world with issue-based alliances that we talk about for addressing issues like climate change and trade and global financial governance and, of course, pandemics. I would say that the G20 moment that we are talking about, and Professor Muni, you referred to synthesis and the importance of both military and economic as well as diplomatic capacity. So with the G20, I think we are talking of a synthesis of these multiple interest groups of the world. The G7 is coming together with the ASEAN, with India as a voice of the global south, and Russia is also in the mix. So this is a great opportunity for India for consensus building, for staking a claim on leadership, and for shaping the global agenda in multiple ways. So let me talk about three innovations that I would argue India has made, which make its position much stronger in dealing with this kind of polycrisis of the world and dealing with the kind of issues the world projects. The one is the political niche that India has adopted in the Russia-Ukraine war, which is, while not compromising energy security, but showing the, as it were, the India way in dealing with this issue with strategic autonomy, yet with a constructive purpose of trying to bring dialogue and diplomacy. The second issue we demonstrated with the pandemic, which is the India, which was the pharmacy of the world, became the vaccine maker of the world, and vaccine Maitri, we know the details of, excuse me, how 163 million doses of vaccines were gifted or sold to the world at a time when 96 countries benefited from that. So I wouldn't go into details, but this was again an exhibition of India's constructive position in the world. And the third or unfolding kind of strength that India is now bringing to the world is of the digital diplomacy or the India stack. And there we've seen how India has opened up its digital public goods, its digital public infrastructure to bring it for the world's benefit. We are talking of India's decade for the next 10 years or so. And we've talked to the G20 with a special focus on the digital. But what is essentially India has said that we have, in the first phase of the digital revolution, where we had the Jan'23, the Jan-Dhan accounts, the Aadhaar, and the mobiles, we have now felt that we could bring them up to population scale of 1.4 billion people. But now we are willing, with the technologies that we are inventing and bringing to the world, to be able to bring it to population to global humanity scale. That means what we did for 1 billion people, we could perhaps do for 8 billion people. And therefore, we try to bridge not just the digital divide within India, but the global digital divide as well. And we've seen multiple examples of this, the CoWIN platform. And now we are talking of technologies which are just unraveling and being tested in India as a laboratory, but ready for use with the world. And I'll just mention two of them, which is the open network, digital commerce, and digital currency. So essentially, the problems, the digital solutions that India had for itself, it is going to open up for the rest of the world. And several of the 5 of the 52 paras of the Bali Declaration of the G20 talked about this new digital world. So I think the short point is that India has made positive contributions in building a political consensus, in dealing with the pandemic, in a health crisis that the world faced, and in digitization of our planet. And in the future, I think this is where India would need to continue with what you mentioned, Professor Muni, as leveraging the economic strengths, leveraging the political position to make specific positive contributions to the world in issues like energy transition, in digitization, and even in manufacturing, where greater and greater offshoring would come to India, and the next generation of manufacturing would take place. So let me stop right there by making the fundamental point that to stay on this high table, to earn credibility, India will have to keep providing the world with these public goods, with these innovations that would strengthen its position as a leader of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much for highlighting the Chinese challenge and also the innovative approach which India has taken. But I totally agree with you that the struggle will have to continue. We just cannot sit down and relax, and the challenges which are unfold sometimes may be totally unpredictable, and we must be prepared for that. I think we are doing very well so far as time is concerned. We have 10 minutes for question answer, and I can ask the council to see if there are questions. Open to the house, please.
Sir, there is a question. Like, given the fact that the world is going to a period to previous one.
The question is, what will be the India's role in maintaining peace between Ukraine and Russia during G20 and SCO presidency this year? This question is not, to the panel. Anyone can.
Not to address to anyone else. Okay.
No, not him, yeah.
I think this is a very valid question, because though we have been pleading for dialogue, the dialogue is still far away, and the war situation is as complicated and unpredictable as it is. But may I request the panelists to kindly respond to this question, Dr. Trigunayat to begin with. Sorry, Ambassador Trigunayat to begin with.
So, well, thank you. This is actually a million-dollar question.
It is,
the whole
yes.
world wants peace, and we are promoting dialogue, diplomacy between the two sides. The fact that President Putin is currently in a bind, even if he has, we know that he has tried to create a ceasefire for a while, but that was not acceptable. Because currently, as I know, the war is not between Russia and Ukraine. This war is between Russia and the United States. And as long as the United States is not on board with stopping the war, I don't see a quick conclusion of it. As far as India's role is concerned, it has been a sane voice from day one in the United Nations Security Council. We have been saying from day one to the President Putin as well as President Zelensky when we talked. So what you can do at the moment is, the moment the countries are in a position to come to the table, and India could perhaps at this stage, in my view, could have tried to do some kind of a special envoy, or after what Prime Minister Modi has spoken to them, Dr. Jaishankar has spoken to his counterparts. So there could be a certain kind of official diplomacy. I mean, I personally believe that we could have been seen a little more proactive in being present there rather than simply talking. Thank you.
Okay. Ambassador Puri?
Professor Muni, thank you very much. This is the question that everybody asks, and it's, in a sense, if you are it, why aren't you there? And why aren't you able to solve the problem? But I think Anil put it very well. Those who are in conflict, do they really want it to end? Are they really there at this time? Can you really push them over? The fact of the matter is that for most of us, India, which is a sane voice, Prime Minister Modi saying that this is not the time of war, we must give diplomacy a chance, all very good. But if the warring factions refuse to come together for whatever reason, the fact is that you can only do so much persuasion, and persuasion is being done. Of that, I have little doubt. But how much will this persuasion count? Of that, I think one should be also cognizant of where the facts are. Let's remember, this is a fight which is in essence involving one declared superpower, the Russian, another one in all practical manner, again, as Ambassador Trigunayat said, virtually there, the perhaps global leader in every single sense of the word. You have the European Union, which has two P5 members who are there in it, and so on and so forth. a very complex issue. In my personal opinion, I would say what we are doing is particularly in order. You have to bring persuasion to the table. You have to bring to people the idea that at the end of the day, it's the global south which is perhaps the largest loser, and the global south's discomfiture cannot just be wished away. Let us remember at various points, like, for example, the food grains embargo, both the Russians and the Americans were at pains to say that they were not responsible. It is these things which, if you bring to the fore, you might be able to bring about a certain understanding that they too are not gainers in what they are up to at this moment. We need to keep up our persuasion efforts.
So you have to raise the costs for the incumbents. Ambassador Bisaria?
I would endorse what my two colleagues have said, but let me go a step further. I would say that, it is important for India, given the current G20 leadership position, that it has both the platform and a responsibility to address the most severe crisis of the world is facing today. So I would agree with the proposition that until the two belligerents don't want to get onto the negotiation table, there is little an outside facilitator can do. But I have just written about it, and it will be published in a while in the public domain. But a study of the history of conflict tells you that either the belligerents should be ready to get onto the negotiation table, or the outside world should see enough of a danger for it to step in. But in this particular conflict, I would argue that India is in an excellent position because it has the trust of both the sides to the conflict. I think Prime Minister Modi is the only global leader who can, in the same morning, talk to Putin, Zelensky, Macron, Biden. So I would specifically suggest that there could be a G20 mechanism of a troika to solve the problem, which could be, by coincidence, would be the past, current, and future president. By coincidence, all developing countries, Indonesia, India, and Brazil. So one possible vehicle that could be used for providing a platform for peace could be a G20 troika. Could step ahead with some diplomacy and persuade the two warring factions to come together.
Well, you're right but I don't think there is a need for a platform. The problem is of the combatants are not seeing it in their interest to stop it and start negotiations. And I think that this is where some compulsions have to be created for them. Costs have to be enhanced of the war which is taking place. Any other question, please? Or you want to say something?
No, sir,
Yeah.
there's no questions, further questions.
Did Dr. Thakur, Ambassador Thakur Singh wanted to say something on this question of Ukraine peace?
Of course, we've listened we've listened to the various views, and I would tend to agree that it is a situation which is in actually it is really gridlocked. But the question is how to move out of it, and it is to, as I would say, Ambassador Ajay Bisaria said, either to put pressure on the belligerents, but if they are not willing, how to create the other scenario where the other stakeholders, which is the developing countries and the ones who are getting affected in terms of their various energy security, in terms of their fertilizer security, how to create a situation where the costs for them start rising. And that, I think, would probably be the pathway which India could use in terms of approaching this issue of kind of de-escalating the situation. Clearly, India has an advantage because we have a deep relationship with Russia. We are speaking to the others, including to Ukraine. So I would say that this is an opportunity for India, and we should see how we can, I think, take forward a certain narrative of peace on the Ukrainian issue. Thank you, Ambassador.
I think we should also lean more on Europe because I know that the US and Russia are, in a direct confrontational position, but some of the levers of the war are being manipulated in Europe. And this is where it is essential that US probably is doing in order to retain its leadership of Europe. And therefore, if the Europe is ready for a dialogue, I hope that US would also feel compelled to go in for a dialogue and somehow resolve it. If there is no other question, I think we come to the end of this thing. I think the question of values is important, but let us not be in any state of complacency that we have arrived and we are going to set the values. To my mind, the challenge is quite formidable. Even so-called friends would create difficulties and problems. Number of Dr. Jayashankar's speeches underlined that. And neighbors are a big challenge. That others would not accept or give, make our efforts credible unless we have all the neighbors standing at the same place, which does not seem to be a situation at the moment, and it is not easy to get that situation. But I hope that, as Ambassador Puri said, with our increasing capabilities and our increasing clout and heft, which Ambassador Bisaria also mentioned, Ambassador Trigunayat also mentioned, we will be heard. We are being heard. We will be listened. And I think the countries of the world would come around a certain set of norms and values to adhere in their mutual engagement. Thank you very much once again, thanking ICWA for this wonderful opportunity, and I call it a privilege to be with this panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Muni, for chairing the session. Thank you, Ambassador Trigunayat, Ambassador Puri, and Ambassador Bisaria. We will take a short